Hello guys, Charles here and welcome back to my channel. So I want to share with you today an interesting relationship involving the dominant 13 chord. So let's dive straight into it. So one of the most common voicings for the dominant 13 chord will probably be something along these lines. So here I'm on a D13 and that gives me fret 10 D on the low E string. Remember I've got an extra B string down here. E, C on the D string on the 10th fret, F sharp, the 3rd, on the 11th fret of the G string, and then fret 12 up here on the B string, giving us a B. So we've got root, 7th, 3rd, 13th. 6 or 13. One of the great ways to find interesting new voicings is to simply look at the voicings you're currently using and see if there's anything in there that looks like something else. See if you go, oh, that actually kind of looks a little bit like another voicing I know. Maybe I could try that out and experiment with those. So a perhaps obvious one in this voicing here is we've got this 3-note bunch at the top, which we most commonly see, if it's not in a dominant 13 chord, in the hendrix chord. So this hendrix chord here is A flat hendrix chord. We're on the 11th fret of the A string, A flat, C on the 10th fret of the D string, G flat or F sharp on the 11th fret of the G string, and B again on the top of the 12th fret of the B string. So we've got D13, and by simply changing the bass note, by a tritone, we can create the hendrix chord. So this is obviously very closely related to tritone substitution because I'm moving my bass note there by a tritone, but it changes the voicing. All I'm doing is moving the bass note and it changes the chord type, I should say. So I go from a D13, which is a pretty pure sound, to an A flat hendrix chord, which just by changing the bass note suddenly has some pull, some tension to it. Now, because I started on a D13 chord, with a tritone substitution, I now know that that's A flat in this instance. I can play an A flat 13 chord. So I could use this voicing here, which is a lovely voicing. I've got A flat, fret 11 of the A string, F on fret 15 of the D string, F sharp or G flat, in this instance we'd call it a G flat, on the 11th fret of the G string, and C, the 3rd, on the 13th fret of the B string. So if I do the same thing here and just take the top 3 notes like I did with this original voicing, we were just looking at the top 3 notes. I've got here F, F sharp, and C, which is 3 notes of a D hendrix chord. I can, on my 7th string, I can reach a D down here on the 15th fret of the low B string. So in context, that would sound like this. So I can go from A flat 13 to D hendrix. The correct name for a D hendrix chord, I probably should have said this at the start, but is a sharp 9 chord, a 7 sharp 9. And it gives us this lovely clash of a semitone, which only really sticks out in the context of the hendrix chord, and sticks out a lot less in the context of the 13 chord. Here's a 13 chord. And it just sounds very pure, very beautiful. But as soon as I change the bass note to D and all the other notes stay the same, that semitone clash now seems a bit more jarring. That's got to be something to do with the way the harmonic series works and how the fundamental highlights certain overtones and harmonics along the way. But for some reason, in the context of a 13 chord, that major third, minor third type sound, that clash isn't anywhere near as pronounced. So what can we do with all this? Well, we know that if we take, for example, the reason I started on D is because we're going to go over the middle section of rhythm changes, which is D7, G7, C7, F7, back to B flat. Now, one of the ways we can play over that is by simply taking our, whichever voicing we start with, basic 7 or a 13, or other options are available. I'm going to take this 13 and I'm going to just sing the melody, and I'm just going to take that voicing down a semitone each time. Now what that's going to do, it's going to highlight on D, it's going to be the correct note, the D7 chord. If I slide down a semitone, that's going to be D flat, which is the tritone substitution of G7, which is currently the correct chord for the second bar here. G7, I'm moving down to D flat 7, so that's the tritone substitution. I slide down another semitone, I'm on C7, and then instead of going up to F7, I'm just going to go down another semitone to B7, which is F7's tritone substitution. So I'm going to try and sing the melody over the top. Quite hard to do with the tritone substitutions, but I'll try my best. Here we go. A 1, 2, 3, 4. So on and so forth. Now I can change the voicings to make it slightly easier to sing. So we don't just take a fixed chord type and slide it down semitones. It just doesn't quite work. But I can change the different voicings I'm using to make it include the melody note. So to do that, on the tritone substitutions, I'm going to play a sharp 5 type chord. So I can have this. So on and so forth. So it's a lot easier to sing with those in mind. However, of course, that only needs to be considered if you are playing the actual melody at that point. And as a chord player, you can play any alterations you like within reason. Of course, we don't want to put anyone off. So I might go for something like this. D13, A flat hendrix, G hendrix, G13, F sharp 13, C augmented, F9, F13, F hendrix, B flat. Okay, so really hard to say it as I'm playing it, but hopefully you got the idea there. I'm going to try that one more time. So something like this. D13, A flat hendrix, G hendrix, G13, D flat, flat 5, C, C augmented, F13, B13, back to B flat. So I'm going to try one without speaking. It's a lot easier to play it without saying it. But you see, I played it differently twice already. I'm just messing around with those ideas. Now the final thing to say is I'm not limited to just these voicings here. Although they're cool and they're great, I can play any inversion or any combination of those notes. So for example, it's really important to know that there are some other really nice voicings of a Hendrix chord. We tend to go for this one. The problem with that is if that's the only voicing you know, in order to do tritone substitutions, you'd have to go. Which is fine, but it's a bit slidey. So we need to know where to play this voicing in other places. So one of them, of course, is the one we've already talked about, these top 3 notes of the 13 voicing built on the A string. Got that nice clash there. So I could do it on D7 down here. Got my top 3 notes. And then this is a lovely voicing. C on the 10th fret of the D string, F on the 10th fret of the G string, F sharp on the 7th fret of the B string. So I've got this. And then onto the one we've already learned up here. So we've got these 3 really important voicings. So I could take those. I could go a 1, 2, 3, 4. And add those new voicings in. I'll try one more of those. 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm just moving those inversions around the neck. You don't have to use them all on every single chord. You can use them as much or as little as you want, but really important ones to know. So just to wrap everything up here, the takeaway here is that on these interesting dominant 13 chords, we found this relationship simply by looking at the chord voicing and going, oh yeah, I can see that 3-note cluster there. I can see it in 2 different chords, so let's experiment using that chord. And because I've got that cluster and that relationship, I can then try the original voicing, which was a D13, on that new tritone substitution note. What's my top 3 notes of that? Looking at this. Does that live anywhere else? Well, yes, of course it lives in a D hendrix chord. Well, what inversions have I got of that? Over the neck. You can do them on different string sets as well. I'm just sticking to that A string set for now. And learn to use these in all sorts of different contexts, and learn to hear them is a really important thing. For example, this one here is quite hard to hear. So you can practice singing that one. Try and really hear those. It's really hard to do, but if you can hear those, they're a lot more likely to come out in your playing. So hopefully some of that was useful for you. It was just an interesting observation I wanted to share with you, because it's the sort of thing that once you start even just that basic skill of, oh, that looks a little bit like another chord, you start to see things all over the place. So for example, another one that this looks like to me, rather than just looking like a Hendrix chord, this top note cluster, which I use a lot. That one there, which is kind of like a 13 flat 9. So again, I can go down that rabbit hole. Oh, well, if that's a 13 flat 9, I see that as a B7 flat 9 in this particular context. Well, what stuff can I do with a B7, and so on and so forth. We can start going down that rabbit hole instead of the tritone substitution one we went down today. If you found that one useful, please do give it a like, subscribe, ding that notification bell, and share with any of your friends who might benefit with a bit more Hendrix chord content. And as always, I hope you're all doing very well, getting plenty of practice in, and I very much look forward to seeing you in the next one. Cheers!
Roll up, let me embed a story you'll never forget. A drip, drip, you're drowning in debt now. You can't buy your way out, and